So at about Stephanus number page 4, Euthyphro, regarding his father, tells the story of what happened about, his father, bound this servant up, threw him in a ditch, and the servant ended up dying from exposure and hunger. And so Euthyphro says, well, that's murder, right? That's a bad thing, and that could result in miasma. Remember all the stuff I talked about the departed psyche and how dangerous that was. And Socrates is like, oh my God, you're suing your dad. Holy cow, that's wild stuff. You must really know what you're doing because the average person like suing a parent. Socrates is like, I get if you're suing just some guy or somebody outsider or whatever, but you're suing your dad. Are you sure that you in order to do that you must be really confident and you must be really knowledgeable. And Euthyphro says, yeah, I am pretty amazing. He's Euthyphro. So there's a little bit of Plato's probably having a little bit of a laugh here, representing someone as being, like about some obscure manner, what's the gods happen to think. This guy claims that he knows exactly what the gods are thinking. So Euthyphro is, yeah, like I'm pretty amazing. So Socrates is like, well, okay, if you have this kind of knowledge such that you're sure that it is the pious, if there's piety involved in suing your father, right? You must really know what Hosein is, right? You must really. And so I'm being charged with I'm Hosein, so I don't think I am, but if I am actually that, says Socrates. So if I can learn from you, teach me about the Hosein, so I can ultimately defend myself against this kid Meletus who's trying to take me to court. And so naturally, this is a standard thing in Platonic dialogues. Is Socrates will set someone up, and they'll be, yes, I know everything, and then and then Socrates will say, well, okay, you're going to be the teacher now, and then Socrates will just, offer definitions, as Socrates, and then I will examine them, and then we'll somehow get to the truth of things. So again, it's a very standard pattern. And in these earlier dialogues, as I mentioned, the Euthyphro is an early dialogue, they really don't come to a conclusion. So there's a spoiler alert. They're not really going to define it. So what we want to see is, why don't they come to a conclusion? So this is grappling with a certain kind of, not just any kind of Platonic text, but a very particular one. They're sometimes called Socratic, thus early Socratic dialogues. Or the aporetic dialogues, which means like, impasse. They don't have a nice solution. All right, so where are we now? Okay, so at about Stephanus number 5, so around Stephanus number page 5, Euthyphro says that, so Euthyphro says that he's useful because of his knowledge. Because of his knowledge of the Hosein, right? So people wouldn't respect me. I wouldn't be useful unless I had this knowledge. So, he has knowledge of divine affairs. And he says, okay, or Socrates says, hey, that's great. I can use that to defend myself. So a very key, so look at about 5D. So in between the letters, you have, in between the page numbers, they're lettered as well. So, you'll have 4A, B, C, D, so on, 5A, B, C, D. So you'll get the hang of it if you look at them and pay attention. So at about 5D, an important little part of the dialogue happens, and here is Socrates says, okay, I'm now going to ask you directly about the Hosein and Hosein, and he says, look, he uses a Greek term idea, which we hear it as idea, right, or form. Sometimes use the Greek term eidos, which is a form. And what is he saying? He's saying, well, this is a presupposition in the dialogue. So always be looking for what the dialogues are presupposing. And Socrates says, I want to know what is common to all the appearances of the Hosein, right? What makes all, you can roughly translate it, all acts of piety, what do they have in common? What does an act have to have, like an action, have to have when you, before you'll look at it and go, yeah, that's a pious action. That's a right way to behave. So what do we mean by a right action, right? So the Hosean is going to have some kind of characteristic that's common to all these actions. And so what do they all share? So that's Socrates' question right at the beginning. So what is, shall we say, kind of like the essence, the intrinsic aspect of the Hosean? What is this about? So this is the central issue. What is this? How to explain what the Hosean is about? And what you want to be careful of right at the beginning here is a distinction between talking about some things essential characteristics and some things accidental characteristics. So I'm just jumping ahead for a second here. For instance, like here, right now I got a sweater on. In the previous video, I didn't have one on. So right now I have the property of me is wearing a sweater. Well, yeah, that's a property of me, but that's not an intrinsic property of me. I didn't like change who I am just because I went from not wearing a black sweater to wearing a black sweater. So that's a kind of property, but that wouldn't be an essential property. What Socrates is asking is not an accidental property like putting on or taking off a sweater, but something more essential. So what's absolutely essential that makes the Hosean, right? That's what he's looking for. Because if you said what makes, me, Dr. Feist, it wouldn't be wearing a black sweater. Even if I wore them all the time, I still would take it off, but that doesn't mean I become a different person. Okay, so you want to get in your head the distinction between just sort of an accidental property and an intrinsic property. And Socrates is always after these intrinsic properties. So what is intrinsic to the Hosean? That's what he's after. And he thinks that ultimately, what's also important, and we'll see Peter Geach and Santos debate about this, is in order to know something, you have to, according to Socrates, it seems, anyways, it seems to be the case that you have to be able to provide a clear definition. So to have knowledge of something means or presupposes to have the possibility have the capability of providing a clear and articulate definition. So it's not just enough to do an action or perform an action, you have to know how to articulate it. And okay, so 5D is where he's saying the main question of the dialogue. What is the Hosean? And I'm getting a little bit lazy. I'm not putting all the accents and the breathing marks in, but I've gone over that in a previous video. Anyways, so what is the Hosean? Right? And remember, we're looking for those essential properties. We want a nice definition that reflects the essential nature of the Hosean in language. And so we're off to the races. So what is the Hosean? You get, right after that, you get the first definition. Now this is common in a lot of Platonic dialogues where Socrates will eventually say, what is, as I talked about earlier in the Republic, like, somebody will say, what is the dika, right? What's justice? Or Socrates in the Theaetetus will say, well, Theaetetus, who's the guy he's talking to, what is episteme? And then Theaetetus will say, well, episteme is, and he'll give a definition, and Socrates will basically critique it, and then the dialogue will move on to repeating the question, but getting a different answer. So you'll have a second definition. Same here. We have what is the Hosean? That's our main question of the dialogue, and we will get from Euthyphro. So Socrates will pose the question. We've seen why he poses it, and then we will now get Euthyphro's, shall we say, first crack at it, right? Oh, okay, well, you're asking me what the Hosean is. I'm this knowledgeable theologian guy of great value, and I'm kind of amazing, he says. I'm going to give you at roughly about 5D. Yeah, so 5D9. At about 5D, so D line 9, we get Euthyphro's response to Socrates' question. So the first definition or the first response comes from around 5D9. So 5D, there's your question, and the first definition is Euthyphro offering it at 5D9. So let's dig a little bit more into that.